2030 World Cup will be the tournament's 24th edition, marking 100 years since the first World Cup in 1930. But currently a host nation is undecided, with FIFA nations due to vote in 2024, which has led to some very controversial and eye-raising moments. If you thought Qatar 2022 was corrupt, you haven't seen anything yet. And the voting process is the perfect place to start. After all, that's what's driving all these actions and decisions from the potential hosts. The decision on who hosts the World Cup is decided as follows. All FIFA's 200 plus members hear the final proposal from the candidates, which includes them saying why they are the best option and how they meet all of FIFA's hosting requirements. And they vote for the best choice, or they have the option to vote for neither or abstain their vote. Obviously, this is where we've seen corruption take place in the past and countries buying bids. So who are the candidates for 2030? We have Uruguay, Argentina, Paraguay and Chile. In Africa, we have Morocco. In Europe, we have Spain, Portugal and Ukraine. And we also have a multi-confederation bid led by the Saudis, but it includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Greece. We'll go through these candidates one by one and I'll explain where their motives are in terms of wanting to host the World Cup, as well as the controversies which lie in pretty much every candidate. Starting in South America, from a historical point of view, we know that Uruguay hosted the World Cup in 1930. Chile also hosted the World Cup in 1962 and Argentina hosted the World Cup in 1978. The four nations officially submitted their joint bid to host the 2030 World Cup on the 7th of February 2023, and their motive is quite simple. It will be 100 years since the first World Cup took place in Uruguay in 1930, and they feel it's right that the tournament comes back to its roots, specifically saying they want to return the World Cup to where football was born. Now, as an Englishman, I take exception to that statement. So the World Cup may have started in Uruguay, however, football was invented right here, and we shared it with the world, who, to be fair, play it a lot better than what we do. But anyway, if their bid was successful, they'd have a special name for the tournament, which would be the Centenary World Cup. And the CONMEBOL president, Alejandro Dominguez, has said the 2030 World Cup is not just another World Cup. We are convinced that FIFA has an obligation to honour the memory of those who came before us. So this bid is really popular with football purists, and it's easy to understand why. So where's the controversy? Well, even though this is a joint bid, there is no doubt that Argentina are leading the way, which has even been confirmed by the Argentina FA president. Though according to many financial sources, Argentina are currently in the middle of an economic crisis. And the Independent go on to talk about poverty levels in Argentina, which are currently at 40%. Now, Bolivia have also been asked to join the bid by Argentina's president, Alberto Fernandez, suggesting that because Bolivia took part in the first World Cup, it's only right that they deserve a place at 2030. That's despite them not actually qualifying for a World Cup since 1994. Now, I speculate that this sentiment is hiding the true reason, which is that, in reality, it is really expensive to host a World Cup, and from Argentina's point of view, using Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, and now Bolivia to co-host means that they can share and spread that heavy cost. And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, because there is also concern around Lionel Messi, seen here in 2018 with Uruguay's Luis Suarez, who was his Barcelona teammate at the time. Now, he may be working with a rival nation to help them secure their bid for the World Cup, which leads us very nicely to Saudi Arabia's bid for the 2030 World Cup. So how is Messi involved in the Saudi Arabian bid, I hear you ask? Well, in May 2022, he signed a 25 million year deal with the Saudis to be a brand ambassador for the country. Messi's deal with the Saudis literally means that he has to promote the country for something like, hosting a World Cup. And of course, being Argentinian and an original ambassador for their bid, this is a massive betrayal, with some going as far to say that he sold himself to the devil, as reported by The Athletic. So before we've even begun to talk about the Saudi bid, we've got this conflict of interest, which is crazy. I mean, it's something like a WWE storyline, isn't it? So let's get into the Saudi Arabia bid. And yes, I can hear you, it's not just the Saudis, it's Saudi Arabia, Greece and Egypt too. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. 3 countries who have never hosted the World Cup, and the bid hasn't been officially announced yet, although all countries are talking about this quite openly in the media. If successful in their bid, this would be the first World Cup that will be hosted in countries that are part of 3 different football federations, which sounds very attractive and is definitely the USP that they're leading with. Now, make no mistake, Saudi Arabia are leading this bid, and they wanted to host the World Cup for many years now. In fact, their strategic vision to host more sport in the kingdom has been successful, although it has come with its controversy. However, the Saudis do have a problem, which is that FIFA rules state that a World Cup cannot be held in the same confederation of a host nation for the next 2 World Cups, meaning that since the 2022 World Cup was hosted in Asia, Saudi Arabia shouldn't be able to host the World Cup till 2034, as per FIFA's own ruling. In order to get round this rule, Saudi Arabia have been on the prowl looking for nations to co-host the tournament with them, and that's in a bid to encourage FIFA to bend their rules. Apparently they've already spoken to Italy, they've spoken to Morocco, but it looks like an agreement has been reached with Egypt and with Greece. But what does co-hosting with Saudi Arabia actually mean, and what are Greece and Egypt getting out of the deal? Well, according to Politico, Saudi Arabia has effectively told Egypt and Greece they will fully underwrite the cost providing they can have 75% of the games in Saudi Arabia. Yes, you heard that right, I told you we were going to get controversial. The report states this will cost billions of pounds in construction costs, but the proposal was discussed in a private conversation between the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the Greek Prime Minister in the summer of 2022. Now, Politico do go on to say it's unclear whether Egypt or Greece have accepted this proposal, but it's clear to see why Saudi Arabia would want to do this. By including Greece and Egypt, it will just boost their chances at the voting process. And where Greece are concerned, there's even more controversy, because originally they were part of a joint European bid with Bulgaria, Romania and Serbia. Now, this bid was abandoned purely because of Greece's alignment with Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and with the rumours of what money they're due to be getting from Saudi Arabia. Talk about controversial. As mentioned, it is believed that a Middle Eastern country would struggle to be successful in their bid so soon after the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. However, from Saudi Arabia's point of view, they're hoping that the presence of Greece and Egypt will encourage more votes and potentially see FIFA change their rules so they can host the World Cup. And ultimately, that's what Saudi Arabia want, but let's face it, they can afford to host the World Cup on their own, but they can't guarantee the votes, and they need Greece and Egypt to even stand a chance of being eligible and to sell this idea of a tri-confederation tournament. But make no mistake about it, if the tournament is given to Saudi, Egypt and Greece, it is a Saudi Arabian World Cup in all but name. Moving on to the next bid in Europe, which is Spain, Portugal and Ukraine. Now, of these nations, only Spain has hosted a World Cup in 1982, and the last time it was in the European Confederation was in 2018 in Russia. Speaking of which, Spain and Portugal have teamed up before and lodged an unsuccessful bid to host the 2018 World Cup. But they're back for 2030 and they announced their bid in October 2020. Originally, it was believed that Morocco were going to be included in the bid. That never happened despite negotiations. The bid was called the Iberian bid, and Spain and Portugal are probably one of, if not the most prepared bids in terms of meeting all of FIFA's requirements for stadiums, hotels, transport and training facilities. All good, right? But with competition to host the tournament hotting up from all around the world, Portugal and Spain felt like they needed to do something to see if they could sway FIFA members to definitely vote for them. So what did they do? Did they go back to Morocco to invite them to join their bid? No, they invited Ukraine. Now, I'm sure you all know what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, and to no fault of their own, it's not the environment that you want to be hosting a World Cup in. And Spain and Portugal are hoping that Ukraine's involvement in the bid will likely give them more support. Now, here's why it's controversial, or some might say unethical. This is clearly Spain and Portugal using the current situation, the awful situation in Ukraine, to garner sympathy votes for their bid, especially from the European nations who may otherwise be torn. Who knows what the situation in Ukraine will be in 2030 and if the war will still be ongoing. If it is, then no problem for Spain and Portugal. They will just dump Ukraine and carry on with the tournament as they were going to originally. By adding Ukraine, it is just blatant pandering, virtue signalling and exploitation of Ukraine's horrible situation to try and garner more sympathy votes for their bid. And it may have already backfired, since Ukraine's announcements that Andrei Pavelko, the president of the Ukraine FA, was arrested for fraud and money laundering allegations, specifically misusing international aid funds up to £600,000. And Ukraine have subsequently been warned that they could face international football suspension from UEFA and FIFA if they don't get their act together. We'll have to see what this means going forward for the bid, and if Spain and Portugal do drop Ukraine. I imagine they're debating what would look worse: bidding with an allegedly corrupt Ukraine FA, or dropping Ukraine from the bid altogether and risk upsetting potential voting nations. I have to say, I've got very little sympathy for Spain and Portugal, and I hope the FIFA nations can see through their tactics. Finally, Morocco have never hosted the World Cup. The last time it was in Africa was South Africa in 2010. Now, Morocco holds the very undesirable title of most World Cup bids without success. Starting in 1994, they've since made 5 failed bids to stage the World Cup, most recently losing out to the United States, Mexico and Canada, who will be hosting in 2026. Seems a bit unfair, doesn't it? But they are determined to host the World Cup and they've declared interest for 2030. Now, with the FIFA World Cup increasing to 48 nations and FIFA's strict rules around stadiums increasing and infrastructure, it may mean that Morocco need to look for co-hosts to share those responsibilities with. And as of yet, we haven't seen an official bid from them, although there have been rumours that they were going to align with Tunisia and Algeria. Nothing controversial here, I just thought I'd let you know what's happening in Morocco. A decision on the tournament will be made in 2024, but it looks like we'll essentially have 4 bids, all pushing different virtues in the faces of the voting nations. We have Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay and Chile pushing nostalgia and tradition. We have Saudi Arabia, who despite not being eligible to actually host the World Cup in 2030, are throwing money at the problem and hoping that cross-confederation alliances and bought allies will attract some votes. With Spain and Portugal shoving Ukraine in nations' faces, hoping to garner some sympathy votes and tug on the heartstrings. And then we have Morocco with their hands up, simply saying it's my turn. As for me, I agree with the South Americans. The 2030 World Cup is not just another World Cup, it deserves a celebration with recognition for 100 years. Couldn't have put it better myself. I'm no financial expert, but I'm hoping that the South American nations can find a way to not only host the World Cup, but also make sure that they have a prospering economy and pulling their people out of poverty at the same time. With that all said, it only seems right that we return to where it all started. My question is, does FIFA, and indeed FIFA's president Gianni Infantino, really care about tradition, or just line in their pockets via questionable allegiances in the name of spreading football around the world? 2030 is indeed a long way away. If you'd like to know more about the 2026 World Cup, please subscribe, check out these videos, I think you might like them. Thanks for watching.